here today. And with that, I'm Malika Andrews, joined by soulmates Richard Jefferson and Kendrick Perkins. We also have front office insider Bobby Marks and senior NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. And coming up on NBA Today, Woj is going to peel back the curtain just a little bit on how Paolo Banchero became the #1 pick after all signs were pointing to Jabari Smith Jr. This is a fascinating story, but we do need to start with the basketball news of the day. And I want to be clear, this is the basketball news of the day. Kyrie Irving, because Kevin Durant, he released a podcast today, and here is some of what was said by KD on how involved he will be on Irving's impending free agency. So he said, there's no involvement at all. I can't be involved with this man's livelihood. This is much bigger than me. Being a free agent is one of the most important times in your career. That can't be swayed by anyone else. Nothing can happen right now. So I'm just going to let things play out, see where the chips fall where they may. It seems like that's what Kevin Durant is saying here. There's a lot to unpack, though, from those quotes. And don't worry, Perk, you're going to have the floor in just a little bit. But Woj, I do want to start with you here because you've been all over this story from the very beginning. Kevin Durant's basically saying out of this situation is out of his control. But what is his role in sort of all of this?
Well, listen, they went into free agency together 3 years ago and were very much connected in how they operate in free agency, came together, came to Brooklyn, got a deal for DeAndre Jordan at the same time, which when you look back didn't really make sense for where that franchise was, where Jared Allen was in his career. So they have impacted each other's free agency, and I do think Kevin Durant is going to impact, has an impact on how this goes with Kyrie Irving and the Nets. That's just how it goes in the NBA when players partner together to go play somewhere or make a decision either to leave or to go forward together. They're doing it in a very connected way. So I think a great deal of this Kyrie Irving story is influenced by Kevin Durant and whether or not Kyrie Irving leaving will push Kevin Durant to ask the Brooklyn Nets for a trade. That's what we are talking about here if Irving goes.
You know what's crazy that I saw in Kevin Durant comments was when he talked about, like, basically it's Kyrie's personal decision and he can't persuade a man to go in a direction. Well, somebody persuades you. You went sit down and you had meetings with Golden State. They persuaded you to leave Oklahoma City when y'all had meetings in the Hamptons. So you're telling me a guy that you call, quote unquote, your brother, that you don't have an impact on his decision making far as him whether or not he want to opt into his contract on the team that y'all chose to join together, and then all of a sudden you come out on the podcast and say, hey, you know what, it's his decision. It's the most important time of his life. First of all, this is not Kyrie's first contract extension or, free agency or whatever you want to call it. So I don't get what Kevin Durant is saying. Right. I don't understand why Kevin Durant don't hold Kyrie Irving accountable. That's the crazy thing to me.
Well, I understand completely what you're saying, and I think when you look at the Brooklyn Nets situation, and I've been there a ton, when both players decide to go there, and then when Kevin Durant signed that extension, everybody was like, oh, okay, well, Kevin Durant, he's the first domino to fall. You're like, obviously there was James Harden, there was some other dominoes, obviously, that needed to go, but you're looking at this as like, oh, well, once Kevin Durant signed, everything else is kind of like,
Gonna work itself out from
and
there.
What I respected when Kevin Durant signed early, he was like, hey, this is the franchise that I'm going to be with. We're going to stop any other nonsense. I want to be here. And then obviously, Kyrie, then the James Harden situation started to happen. And so you're still looking at Kevin Durant as you're that dude. This franchise hinges on every decision that you're going to make. And so, hopefully the Nets are having conversations with him saying like, hey, these are our options. If he leaves, what are you doing? Because KD could obviously impact his decision and say, listen, if he leaves, I'm leaving too. And now it's like, for me, if you're Kyrie, the fact that he's trying to stay out of it implies that he's more committed to the Nets than he is to Kyrie.
Well, and to be very clear, right, Kevin Durant, he signed that contract extension last offseason. Kyrie Irving and James Harden, there was questions about whether or not they would do so. They obviously did not. James Harden has since departed. So the question that sort of comes up in my mind, and I know, Woj, you've written about this extensively, is where exactly can Kyrie Irving go because of these various cap space situations? So what would that even look like, Bobby?
Well, I think the place he should go is Brooklyn.
The place he should stay.
I do. I mean, I think there's so much at stake for both sides here. I think there's so much at stake when you look at it from Kyrie Irving financially, what the alternatives are going to be outside of the Nets when you look at a lack of market for teams that have cap space. The likelihood is that a signing trade is likely off the table because of all these hard cap restrictions, how much teams are willing to give up in value. And I think there's a lot at stake for Brooklyn, right? We talked about the Kevin Durant factor. If Irving elects to go somewhere else, there's a domino effect here. And the last time I looked at it, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, a healthy Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Patty Mills, what else they do in free agency, we can put that team up there with top 3 in the Eastern Conference. So there's a lot of consequences here that everyone has to realize what the consequences are going to be.
I think the concern right now for the Nets organization is negotiations. Listen, people try to gain leverage. If you're Kyrie Irving, you are trying to get the Nets to give you a longer-term deal with more guaranteed money than they want to give. The Nets are trying to go in the other direction. Shorter deal, incentivized because he just hasn't been on the floor as much as they'd like the last couple of years. This is getting acrimonious. And I think that's the concern when you look at not just Kyrie Irving's future in Brooklyn, but Kevin Durant's future and whether they can hold this thing together right now.
Absolutely. I do just want to pull up the list of teams that Woj, you reported that Kyrie, he sort of has a wish list that he could potentially see himself fitting with if he and the Nets can't come to an agreement on this situation. You can see the full list here, but I want to be very clear. One part of your reporting, Adrian, was that this is the list that Kyrie Irving would like. That's not necessarily, I would like a whole bunch of things that don't necessarily come to fruition at any given moment. I would have liked to have, a full day off. Some things don't come to fruition.
The interest isn't mutual.
Okay, that's all I wanted to hear.
The interest isn't mutual in several of these places, and obviously the Lakers are the ones that loom. And will Kyrie Irving walk away from a $36 million player option this year that he can just opt into and have that money guaranteed, especially after a year when he lost about $17 million by not being vaccinated last year, and untold more with a sneaker deal that isn't going to be there for him anymore, maybe at the level it was. So financially, and as Bobby's documented well, the Lakers, except for if they go out and really do some creative things financially, they can't pay him any more than $6 million next season. Now they could clear cap space and sign him to an extension down the road, but you're essentially looking at a $30 million plus pay cut to walk away from this Brooklyn team to opt out. And as Bobby said, just opting in and hoping to get a sign and trade somewhere, it's a very complicated scenario.
Well, one, how can Kyrie Irving have the audacity to have a wish list, right? Like, how can you present an organization that you have been disrespectful to since the time you have arrived, not showing up to practice, not sending out a text or giving people a phone call, disrespecting your head coach, disrespecting your teammates at times. And then on top of that, right, we all think, and Bobby, that was a great point, about the right thing for Kyrie Irving to do is to sign back to Brooklyn. We all know the right thing, but when we go right, Kyrie Irving goes left. So now you got to put yourself in Kyrie Irving's mind and his brain. And he don't really care about a lot of things that we're talking about, saying, oh, the common sense will tell you, opt into your contract, play with Kevin Durant, make $30+ million next season, don't turn that down, or go play with LeBron James for $6 million. I think he should actually go play with LeBron James, to be honest with you. When I look at it, when he was playing with LeBron in Cleveland, their playoff record was 39-13. We haven't really seen Kyrie Irving play consistent elite basketball at a high level for a long period, expanded period of time since playing alongside LeBron James.
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, Kyrie Irving is a max player.
Yeah.
But on a year-to-year basis. I mean, that's and you know how the NBA works. Like, Brooklyn's trying to do something that's unique, signing a player to a max contract on a short term, or maybe games played in years 3 and 4, incentive based on the end. And if you're Kyrie Irving, you're looking at still like the player that was in Cleveland, that was in Boston, that is a 4 or 5 year guy, and there's not many options out there for him. There's not many teams that are willing to commit 4 years to him, even if in a sign and trade. The sign and trade rules is that it's a minimum of 3 years in a deal. Like, you can't do a sign and trade and say it's a 1 year contract. So there's a lot of complexities to it. But as I said, he's a max player, but on a year-to-year basis.
And we know that if Kyrie Irving plays for the Nets this year, plays 70 games, makes a deep run in the playoffs.
You already know what it is.
The following year, if he doesn't want to play in Brooklyn anymore, there will be teams who will create the salary cap space. There will be opportunities for him that aren't there right now.
Well, and this is the one thing that I want to make sure that is very clear. Kyrie is always allowed to go do whatever he wants. Kyrie is in a position where if you do not want to get vaccinated, fine. If you want to maneuver in a certain way and you want to take time off, but what happens when you do that is right now, this is when teams get their get back. This is when teams get their get back. Kyrie and everybody can do whatever they want until it's time to get paid. Now you're saying, I want max money for multiple years. And it's like, well, you're always trying to earn your next contract. And so if you were Kyrie Irving and you were the owner of a multi-billion-dollar team, would you give yourself a max contract? Because it's not based off talent anymore. It's based off of production. And production is when you're on the court and what happens, how you lead a franchise as an organization. So for me, Kyrie doesn't deserve it because he hasn't put himself in that spot. But is he one of the most talented players we've ever seen? Yes. Yeah. Is he a max player with a max contract? Yes. But if this is how your last 2-3 years have gone, you're not going to get it when it's time for the team to be like, okay, you can have that, but now it's our turn to be like, no more.
Right. And there is no deserve. It's what you can get in the marketplace, right? And so, listen, if there were big market teams right now who had significant salary cap space, I think there might be a number of them who would still be willing to do that with Kyrie Irving. But the Knicks, who are trying to create salary cap space, they've got a target in Jalen Brunson. And maybe a level of confidence they can go out and get him. They know who he is. The relationships and history with the people in New York are pretty unique and really strong. That's where they're making their run. We know if the Lakers had a bunch of salary cap space, if they had traded Russell Westbrook's contract into Oklahoma City's cap space and gave up picks and had the space, they would do it.
You know what's the crazy thing, though? Kyrie Irving could have got the money that he wanted because we all know that it was supposed to go Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving all was supposed to sign their extensions before the season started. And then who messed it up? Kyrie Irving.
Well, I do think, though, that's one of the reasons why we're talking about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving being intrinsically linked. When Kevin Durant is talking about the fact that this is a grown man who needs to make his own decisions because it was a joint decision to then come to Brooklyn together, that's why these questions are coming about whether or not then there would be an exit at the same time. Bobby, before we go to break, what would a package, I mean, and this is purely hypothetical, if we're looking at Kevin Durant, what would a package even look like?
I think if you're Sean Marks, you look at the top 25 players under the age of 25 and say, do I want a Zion Williamson? Do I want Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton? I'm just hypotheticals here. That's the players I'm looking at as far as just going down. Am I looking at Memphis's roster with all those young players outside of Ja Morant? You're not looking for players in that, DeMar DeRozan and, Nikola Vucevic. You're looking at young players to build around.
And what would make a potential Kevin Durant trade really unique is he's got 4 years left on his contract. And that makes virtually every team in the league willing to get involved. Again, because if you trade for him, he has to play for you. He's got to perform. And so it opens up when a player's got 1 or 2 years left, you're limited. Teams in small markets know if we trade for him, he's probably going to walk.
The only question I have is, if Kyrie does opt out and go someplace else, what are the options that the Brooklyn Nets have to then pair Kevin Durant up with someone in free agency or something? Like, are their options completely gone if he leaves?
You're right at the salary cap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where you're looking at. You have Ben Simmons and Durant combined to make $80 million. Joe Harris, the list goes on as far as where you're at.
They need to get Patty Mills to opt back into his contract. That's an important factor for this Nets team.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this all so fascinating. We will continue to be monitoring this situation closely. We still, though, have a lot to come on NBA Today, including